Hello and welcome everyone to new contributor orientation for January 2025. This is our first new contributor orientation of the new year. So happy new year and welcome everyone. Hope that you're doing well on your New Year's resolutions so far. Now, before we start off, we do have a few housekeeping items. Firstly, this meeting is recorded and will be published on YouTube. All meetings in the Kubernetes community abide by a code of conduct, which you can find at the link on the bottom of this slide. The slides are posted in PDF form on the GitHub repo. We could also grab that link. If one of my assistants could do that for me, I would appreciate it. It basically sums up to please be respectful of the speakers and your fellow attendees and generally be excellent to each other. Please use the chat to ask questions and have discussions throughout the call. There will be a Q&A section at the end. There's actually a couple of points where we ask for questions, where we encourage you to ask questions verbally if you'd like to, because those will be on the recording so that others can benefit from your questions. So if you're comfortable asking questions verbally, please do once we get to those sections. A copy of these slides is also available on GitHub, and the link is also in the meeting invite. If someone could grab that link as well and post it in the chat, that would be helpful. The slides are provided as a PDF file. The links in the deck are not clickable as displayed on GitHub, but they should be clickable if you download the file. The purpose of this meeting is to orient you in the Kubernetes community. That means giving you a sense for how the community works and what your part is or could be within it. We'll start off with a presentation to convey information about the community. Then we'll have a Q&A section where you're welcome to ask any question you would like of your hosts today. We have several regular contributors on today. Hearing the questions that you ask can benefit anyone watching the recording, so please do ask questions verbally during that time if you're comfortable doing so. I'm your primary host today. I'm Caslin Fields. I'm a co-chair of the Special Interest Group for Contributor Experience. We'll go over what a special interest group is here in a bit. We'll also talk about what subprojects are and how the CNCF relates to all of this. And I am also a co-lead for the Contributor Comms subproject within SIG Contribx and a CNCF ambassador. So we'll talk about what all of those things mean. Trying to decide if I want to do other host introductions now. I think I will welcome our other hosts to introduce themselves now. If you are a regular contributor on the call who's going to help out with questions and maybe help out with some of the work items, please introduce yourself now.
Hey y'all, I'm Chris Short, longtime contributor to Kubernetes. Caslin and I both work on the Kubernetes contributor communications team. We're both co-leads and been around the project for going on my 8th year now. So I know where things are if you're lost.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here, Chris. Do we have anyone else on today? I think we're good to move on. But if there are any other regular contributors on who want to help answer questions and stuff, you're welcome to introduce yourself later as well. Now, let's dive in. The Kubernetes community is a very big group of people who work together to create and maintain the Kubernetes project. Here are some numbers to give you a sense for just how big the Kubernetes community is. We track data about our contributors via GitHub and a few other contributor tools, and we collect them in a tool called DevStats. This is basically a big database of information about Kubernetes contributions, and you're welcome to explore it yourself. These stats were pulled on November of 2024, so they're just a couple of months out of date, not too far. And at that time, we had over 92,000 contributors who had made almost 4.5 million contributions, and all these contributions are viewed by just 7,500 people with reviewer privileges. We'll talk more about what a contribution might mean and who a reviewer might be a little later in this presentation. Here's another visualization of how large our community is and how fast it's grown. This graph from the 2023 Kubernetes Project Journey Report, this is getting a little bit out of date, but the curve is still really nice. But it shows how we've grown from Kubernetes beginnings in 2014 to today. We grew from 0 to over 80,000 contributors just in our first 10 years. Now, before we dive deeper into the community, some of you may be unfamiliar with what Kubernetes is and what it does. Kubernetes is an open source container orchestration tool. Open source means that it's made by people around the world, some of whom are paid to work on it, but many of whom are volunteers. And the code of the Kubernetes software is publicly available under an open source license that describes exactly who, when, and how the software and its source code can be used. And the cool thing that Kubernetes does is orchestrate containers. Let's go over what that means. Businesses have many applications they need to run. For example, they may have a payroll application, logistics applications, or a company website. These applications need to run somewhere. So businesses also have a lot of computers to run these applications on. Kubernetes enables businesses to say, hey, Kubernetes, here's the computers I have, and here's the app I need to run. You can describe various levels of detail about how that application needs to run or the hardware it might need, and Kubernetes will run it on a machine for you. It also provides some handy functionality for managing the application while it's running. For example, it can provide some help for the process of updating the application to a new version. Exactly how it does all of this magic is what Kubernetes contributors work to maintain and improve every day. Let's learn more about how contributors build Kubernetes by exploring our community's structure. I'm going to take a drink real quick while you look at this graph. Kubernetes is an open source project within the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. The CNCF is a nonprofit organization with the stated mission to make cloud native ubiquitous. To that end, they support many open source projects that enable companies to run applications in the cloud. The CNCF provides a variety of guidance and support to its projects, including legal support, codes of conduct, help with logos, and copyright, and all sorts of things. The pyramid below the CNCF in this diagram represents the structure of the Kubernetes community. At the top, arguably interfacing the most with the CNCF and presiding over various topics that affect the entire community and project, is the steering committee. This is a body of 7 members who are elected by Kubernetes org members. We'll go over more about what org membership means shortly. With a project so large, there are many different concepts within the project that need unique skills and knowledge. For example, the way the Kubernetes nodes where workloads are run do what they do is one area of expertise. Meanwhile, the challenge of writing and maintaining the Kubernetes docs needs folks with a different expertise. People who work on specific areas of the project gather together in what are called special interest groups, or SIGs. These break up the work of building and maintaining the Kubernetes project into more sensible chunks. Sometimes, however, there are big areas that need attention that are both very significant and cut across SIGs. Sometimes these are split out into what we call working groups. A working group is generally temporary, created to address a specific issue, and then meant to disappear as a focus group once that topic is sufficiently addressed by ongoing SIGs. A defining characteristic of working groups is that they generally don't own any code or features, at least not in the long term. Working group work either is or will be owned by one or more SIGs by the time the working group dissolves. Unless, that is, the working group becomes a SIG, which does happen occasionally. But even the work of one SIG can be pretty broad in scope. There can be hundreds of contributors to a single SIG. So SIGs further break down their work into sub-projects. Currently, there are 24 special interest groups, 7 working groups, and 3 committees in the Kubernetes community. Last updated in September, so that might not be accurate anymore. I should probably go check it. um, we can further group the SIGs and working groups by their scope. Some groups operate at a project level, and all other work in the project depends on them. Some groups work at the horizontal level, meaning that they have technical focus that is both deep and broad and own core functionality from a project architecture perspective. Vertical groups have deep specific technical focus that depends on the work of the horizontal groups. And of course, both the horizontal groups and the vertical groups depend on the work of the project groups. So here's a diagram of all the SIGs and working groups currently active in the Kubernetes project as last I updated it a couple of months ago. I guess this was in November. So to call out just a few that are on here, SIG Release and SIG Docs are groups whose work you might be familiar with. They operate at a project scope. Though you may not have known it, you've probably encountered the work of SIG API Machinery and SIG Auth before. We consider these to be horizontal groups. And in the vertical groups, you can also find lots of familiar concepts like autoscaling, scheduling, networking, and node. You might want to refer back to this diagram later as you're exploring groups to contribute to. Feel free to ask questions about these during the Q&A or in the chat now. But for now, we're going to move on to talk a little bit more about contribution. Now that you've learned the basics of how the community is structured, let's talk about where you might fit into all of this. First off, let's briefly explore why you might want to contribute. There are many reasons people contribute to the Kubernetes community. For some, their job requires contributing. There are also contributors who work with the community on a purely volunteer basis. There are also those who are somewhere in the middle, where their work needs them to contribute sometimes, but they also do extra work for the community outside their job, like me. So, why do so many people contribute without getting paid? They may want to grow specific skills for their resume, or maybe they just want to meet people working in the industry. Maybe they just think the technology is cool and they just want to dive deep and help build it. Or sometimes folks just like being part of a community of people all working towards similar goals. You should think carefully about why you want to contribute. As you get more engaged with the community, you'll get more out of it if you can clearly tell people what you want. If others know who you are, what you want, and what you can do, they can more easily help you find work, opportunities, and connections that will most benefit you. Regardless of why you're interested in contributing, you're probably wondering what it means to be a contributor. To answer the question of what it means to be a contributor, let's first explore what might count as a contribution. The truth is that any work you do to support the Kubernetes project is a welcome and valued contribution to the community. That sounds broad and vague, but it's important. There's a lot of work that contributors do behind the scenes to make this project run, and it's certainly not all writing code and making pull requests on GitHub. That said, it can certainly help to have some examples. Here are a few you might have thought of and some you might not have. For example, did you start off by posting a hello message in the Kubernetes new contributors channel in Slack? That's a contribution. Have you commented on an issue or proposal of a new feature to share your thoughts or opinions? That's a contribution. Even watching or attending this meeting right now is a contribution, so pat yourselves on the back for contributing today. As a community, we try our best to acknowledge and appreciate contributions to the community in many forms. But if so many vague and varied things can count as a contribution, then what does it mean to be a contributor? There are varying levels of being a contributor. You might remember our slide earlier where we mentioned contributors and reviewers. This slide dives into more detail on what those terms mean. Starting at the bottom, anyone can be a contributor. If you do any of the things on the previous slide and more, you're already a contributor. If you contribute to the community in any way, then you might be what we call a non-member contributor. This means that you pop into the community and contribute, likely in small, disconnected ways. But if you want to really get involved with the community, you might want to go for org membership. An org member refers to a member of the Kubernetes organization on GitHub. Being an org member gives you higher privileges to interact with the tools that contributors use to do their work, especially on GitHub, like our Prow bot, which helps us apply labels and configure issues using GitHub comments. Having org membership is a sign that you're an active, engaged contributor who intends to contribute in more structured ways within the community. You're not just picking up a single issue or asking a one-off question. You're probably developing expertise in a certain area of the project. You might be contributing to one or more sub-projects or SIGs in consistent, measurable ways. So you'll be ready to become an org member when the contributors that you work with regularly are familiar with your work and will vouch for you as sponsors on your request for org membership. Beyond becoming an org member, there are increasing levels of trust, ownership, and responsibility that you could choose to pursue. Once you've been engaged in an area for a while, you might have enough knowledge to help review contributions or pull requests from other contributors. Eventually, you might be trusted enough to have the final say on whether some code is merged or a contribution is accepted and displayed on something like the Kubernetes.io website. Then you would be an approver. If you become a strong expert in a specific area who is highly trusted and regarded for your expertise, then you might take on new responsibilities. You might become the person others come to with questions, and you might lead sessions or work for an area. At that point, you might be a subproject owner. If you're an expert who starts leading things in that area, you might also take on responsibility for various resources within that area and how they relate to other parts of the project. For example, you might take responsibility for the README file, defining a whole subproject, which is where people would go to learn about that subproject. And you might become the contact person who triages requests from other parts of the project or from outside. At that point, you might be a subproject lead. If you're leading a whole subproject, that's a considerable chunk of work within a SIG. You're probably interacting and collaborating with other leads from other subprojects, and you're probably developing a pretty strong sense of the mission, objectives, and ongoing work of the SIG as a whole. At that point, you may become a chair or tech lead for an entire special interest group. If you remember our earlier community structure diagram, you might wonder if becoming a member of the steering committee would be the next step. But steering is an elected position. You can actually run for steering at any point in here, but you'll be more likely to get elected if other contributors know you and your work. The latter might seem like the one true path in contribution, but I want to remind you that there is no single path for your contributor journey. Most contributors end up contributing in multiple areas of the project, and some people even develop ownership in different SIGs at the same time. And I lost my place. um, some people even develop ownership. Yeah, there we go. Just because you're learning and contributing in one SIG doesn't mean you can't check out a different SIG. Remember, most contributors are at least partially volunteers. Almost everyone contributing is doing it because they love it. So look around, find what you love, and do that. Now that you know the basics of how the community is structured and how you might fit into it, um, as we've established, you might already be a non-member contributor, but if you want to do more to contribute, let's explore where you might start. The fastest way to learn and make yourself useful will be to find a SIG that suits your interests and just start getting involved there. That might not mean immediately picking up an issue and writing code. Often, getting involved means attending meetings, reading notes and existing issues, and just generally starting to get a feel for what that group does. Yeah, I added this one and I never adjusted the speaker notes for it. One thing that I really want to point out here is the Kubernetes Slack and the KDev mailing list. So if you want to get involved contributing, make sure that you're in the Kubernetes Slack first and foremost. Go to slack.kades.io to get an invitation to join the Slack. All of the SIGs have their own channels in there, and it's the way that most asynchronous communication and work is done within the Kubernetes project. There's also the KDev or Kubernetes Developer Google group. dev@kubernetes.io is the mailing list. And that's meant to be our primary method of communicating with contributors. So if you want to contribute, make sure you join that mailing list so that you get news for contributors about what's going on in the project. Things like what's going on in the release cycle, when code freeze is coming, all of those kinds of things are communicated through the dev mailing list. They're also online in various places, but the mailing list is the easiest way. Now, let's explore how you can learn more about a special interest group so that you can find groups that are doing work relevant to your interests. Where can you start learning? First, check out the Kubernetes community repo on GitHub. In this repo, you can find folders containing information about each SIG and working group that's active right now. When you click on a SIG's folder in the community repo, it'll show you the folder's README. At the top of that file, you'll find a brief summary of that SIG's focus area and likely a link to their more detailed team charter. That'll give you a broad, high level idea of what that special interest group does. Below the summary of the group, you'll find information about when the group meets. Attending meetings is often a great way to learn more about who's in the group, what they're working on, how they do that work. And attending meetings is a great way to start getting to know those people and for them to start getting to know you so that they can help you find work that you're interested in. You'll also find information about the SIG's leadership. Most SIGs have a concept of chairs and of technical leads. These leaders are at the same level of trust and responsibility, but likely own different types of tasks for supporting the SIG. Chairs tend to do more project management type work for the SIG, while tech leads tend to do more architectural leadership like managing repos and certain kinds of technical decisions and processes. Each SIG defines what those roles mean to them, and each leader will be a little bit different. You'll also find contact information for the SIG. Most SIGs in Kubernetes do a lot of their asynchronous communication in their channel on Slack, which you can join by going to slack.k8s.io. Each SIG also has a mailing list. Important announcements for all contributors to a SIG will go out to that mailing list. The mailing list will also be invited to all the SIG meetings via Google Calendar. So make sure that you join the mailing list for the specific SIG you're interested in if you want to know more about what that specific SIG is working on. Both the dev mailing list and the SIG working list, or mailing list. You'll also find information about where to find issues and PRs related to that SIG, and other information like the GitHub teams that are part of that SIG. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to become a contributor, make sure you join that KDev is what we colloquially refer to it as, but the dev at kubernetes.io mailing list or Google group. Checking out each SIG's folder will show you lots of information about that specific SIG. But what if you want to find information about all the SIG meetings so that you can maybe pick based on which ones have meetings at good times for you? The community maintains a contributor website at k8s.dev, k8s.dev. And within k8s.dev, we have a page with all the information about all the different public community meetings. So go to k8s.dev/calendar to see a list of all the meetings. Clicking on one of those will bring up a new window for you to add the meeting to your own calendar. That can be a great way to get a sense for which groups meet at times that might work for you. Now that you know how the community is structured and where you might fit in, and how to start learning more, you might also want to know if there's any actively open work that you could pick up and become a part of. We try to reach out to the SIG leads each month to ask them to share any current opportunities they would like you, prospective contributors, to know about. This list is the same as the last time that we did this meeting, so if you're tuning in just for this part, it'll be a repeat of what we talked about last time, but we'll go over what's going on. So, first up, on this slide, you can see evergreen opportunities. So, these are opportunities for work that are basically always available or which are available on a regular cadence. First off, most SIGs, when they have their meetings, ask for someone to take notes for them. And the purpose of the note taker is to, or the job of the note taker is to follow along with what's happening in the discussion in the SIG meeting and write notes as best you can, so that if someone didn't attend the meeting, they could just check out the notes and hopefully get the gist of what was talked about. So even if you're not very familiar with that SIG, you're always welcome to pop in and take on the role of note taker. Uh, People don't always volunteer for it. And then the people who are running the meeting end up taking the notes and then they're talking and taking notes at the same time. So it's really helpful when folks, even if they're new, hop into note taking. And if you're not sure about something, it's a good opportunity to pop in and ask a question because you have the excuse of note taking to ask the question to make sure that you're taking the notes right. And often folks from the meeting will pop in with their own little notes to add in, but it's really nice to have someone focused on it. So, any SIG meeting that you join into, if they ask for a note taker, don't be afraid to hop in and take that on. In the special interest group for contributor experience, which is the SIG that I help to run, we have a couple of evergreen opportunities. One is SIG Spotlight blogs. So in our comms subproject, which I'm also co-lead of, we always have the opportunity for folks to hop in and interview a SIG lead and then write a blog post about what you learned about what that SIG does. The purpose of these is to make sure that folks both inside and outside the Kubernetes contributor community know about the awesome work that those SIGs are doing. Um, SIG names are not always obvious about what kind of work they do. So by interviewing the chairs, you can learn a lot about what that group does and share that info with others. So you don't need to know anything about the SIG to start off with. The point is for you to learn and then teach others what you learned about that special interest group. So the comms team meets on Fridays at 8 a.m. Pacific time. If you ever want to join a meeting, you can also pop into the Slack channel, SIG Contribex Comms, and say that you're interested in helping with a Spotlight blog, and we'll help you get set up. Another, I need to change this. Another regular opportunity is Summit staff. So it used to be the Kubernetes Contributor Summit. It just changed at the end of last year to now Maintainer Summits at KubeCons. So these are events that happen before KubeCons. And we always ask for staff for those. So we'll have leads of a few different areas to manage the stuff that the Kubernetes community needs to do as part of those maintainer summits, um, like comms. And especially the comms team is a good opportunity because you don't need to be attending the event to help out with comms. You probably wouldn't be a lead, but you could join in as a shadow if you think you might be able to take on the lead opportunity at some point in time. Or you could just be a volunteer. Just be like, hey, I want to help out with making sure the contributor community knows about what's going on at the maintainer summits. So that stuff is going on right now. There's a summit staff channel, and there's also like a Kubernetes contributor summit channel, something like that. If you pop into those and say that you want to help out, folks will probably help you find it. And the links to the PRs for those should be open too. Another one that I don't have on here, I think, is the release team. Release team shadow applications just closed. I wanted to call out. So release team isn't open right now, but is open regularly 3 times a year. So if you're interested in being a part of how Kubernetes does releases, watch for those. Another one here, SIG docs. I don't think we have any representation on from docs today, right? Don't think so. So Docs has a couple of opportunities that they want to share with all of you. One is PR reviews. Anyone can learn to review PRs for SIG Docs, and SIG Docs is one of the PRiest SIGs because they've always got to update docs and add new docs, and there's always work going on with all of that. So there's always PRs to be reviewed. So they really need help with that. So they have a program to help you get familiar with how to review PRs. It's a really nice opportunity to learn and contribute. And docs are a great place to contribute because you both learn about the project because you're working with the docs that describe how the project works, while doing really important, meaningful contributions that are publicly visible. They also have their own new contributor meet and greet on the first Tuesday of every month at 10:30 UTC, which you can find more about in the Kubernetes community repo in GitHub in the SIG docs area within that repo. So if you are interested in SIG docs, you might want to check out their new contributor meet and greet. You can also ping them on Slack. Alrighty. So evergreen opportunities are great because they represent work that always needs doing and which is likely well defined. But a lot of work is one-off style. An issue that needs fixing or work on a new feature, many of those types of tasks require certain skills to complete. You might see an open request that requires a skill that you want to develop and think you should pick up that task to learn. Be wary of doing that. If the task was easy for someone in the SIG, someone who's already involved with the SIG to do, then it probably wouldn't be an open request. And many requests with skill requirements are open because no one in the community currently has those skills, so they can't teach them to you. So you have to be comfortable with learning on your own if you pick up one that's a stretch goal for you. Or they may be open because the people who do have those skills within the SIG are too busy to teach someone how to do those things. So be wary of taking on things that are stretch goals. But if you're coming to the community with certain skills, like certain programming languages or specific technical skills like Linux networking or expertise in a certain cloud provider, those like skill requirement tasks could be a great opportunity for you to contribute to the community. So let's talk a little bit about what we have open there. So in current calls for help for SIG Contribex, one that's been open for a while, we've got a little bit of work going on with it, is website maintenance. So cates.dev, I mentioned earlier, if you go to cates.dev/calendar, you can find that calendar with all the meetings on it. We need some help maintaining that website. It's based in Hugo Doxy, and we've had an issue for several years where we've done some customization with the site, of course, and that has been preventing us from upgrading a couple of the different technologies that the site is built on. So there's at least one PR open now uh, to work on that. I think the person who was working on that is here. We need folks to review the PR. That's a good call out, Mario.
Oh,
So if
yeah, I
anyone
gotta go
on
do that.
yeah, Chris is very familiar with this. He's been working on this issue for a long time. So if you're familiar with Hugo Doxy website kind of stuff, join in the party on cates.dev. We could use some help. Literally has been an issue for multiple years, so it's not like the bar is that high. Let us know if you're interested. Another one is the mentoring program. So we have a mentoring subproject within SIG Contribex. The idea of the mentoring group is that they help the project manage its involvement with various mentoring programs like the LFX mentorships or Google Summer of Code. So those are like the official mentoring programs for open source. Like mentees within those actually get paid through the programs that they're doing sometimes. And so we have to submit projects to those programs and making sure that all of the folks in the different SIGs are aware of the deadlines when they need to submit those projects requires program management. And so we have to have someone who's willing to be a part of the project and actually pay attention to those things and let everybody know when they're happening. So we've been working on reviving this group. It kind of didn't have much attention for a while. So if you'd be interested in helping do some important project management for the project to help us understand what's going on with these mentoring programs, that would be great. Another aspect of the mentoring subproject is also like homegrown mentoring programs. So say a SIG wants to train up new reviewers or approvers or SIG chairs. They might have a specific role in mind that they want to train people for. Sometimes they'll set up a cohort of folks who they're all training to do those things at the same time. So mentoring subproject could step in and help them figure out how to do that. So all sorts of things about mentoring in the project. If you're interested in that, let us know. That subproject needs some help. It's got like one person leading that charge and another person who's been doing it for many, many years and is tired and needs to get out of it. So if you want to help out with that, we'd love to have some help. And another thing that could use some help is Electo. So, Electo is our homegrown software that we use to run elections for the community. We mentioned earlier that steering committee is an elected set of positions. So, we use Electo to run those elections. It's written in Python and Flask, and most of the folks who wrote it have moved on and are not part of the project anymore. And so we need people who are familiar with Python or Flask or who want to be familiar with both to pick that up. But we don't have people who know it currently. So if you want to do that, you'll be learning a lot on your own. I went very in depth with those, but I'll try to go a little bit more quickly through the others. SIGDocs, always interested in blog reviews. We mentioned earlier that they have programs for helping you learn how to do PR reviews. Specifically, blog reviewing really needs some help. So if you're interested in doing that, we could use that. Localization. If you have language skills in a language other than English, you need familiarity both with English and that other language. If you're on this call, I would imagine that you have some familiarity with English. Um, but we always need help with localization. So if you want to help out with that, that's an opportunity. SIG testing. So SIG testing owns our Prow tool that we use in GitHub to use comments on GitHub issues to do stuff like set labels on it, like where is this in our triage process, who's assigned to it, all of that kind of stuff we can manage with Prow. So help with Prow is always helpful. If you know a little bit about what Prow is, if you start contributing and do a few PRs, you will get familiar with Prow at least a little bit. So they could really use some help with maintaining that. Conformance testing is another area that they pointed out as needing some help. Feedback and help enabling adoption of new conformance testing tools for end users. So there's a concept where Kubernetes is open source software, so anyone can use it. You can download the source code. You can do whatever you want with it. So how do we make sure that a Kubernetes implementation out there in the world is consistent with what open source says Kubernetes should be? That's conformance. And so the testing group recently came out with a new conformance testing tool, Hydrophone, which is meant for end users of Kubernetes to be able to check that their implementation of Kubernetes is in conformance with the expectations of open source Kubernetes. It's a whole thing. So if you're interested in that, they didn't mention exactly which skills they need there, but you could ask. SIG architecture, general call for help. SIG architecture is a very broad and fundamental part of the project about the architecture underlying open source Kubernetes. What's needed there is really kind of general familiarity. You need to attend meetings, start to understand what areas SIG Arch owns, what areas really need help, and just kind of dive in. They could use more regular contributors. SIG Network, the Gateway API is a really cool new thing. It's not that new at this point, but it's a way that Kubernetes manages ingress traffic. So traffic coming from outside of a Kubernetes cluster. We had an implementation of ingress for a long time in Kubernetes, and it was based on what we thought people would do with ingress. And that was not exactly what people actually did with ingress. And so we had to kind of rework it. And that is Gateway API. So if you're interested in that challenge, check that out. They're building some new stuff from scratch. So that's pretty cool. API reviewers, longstanding familiarity with the project in the area of SIG network. So they have a few reviewers for API networking API stuff within Kubernetes. But if you start developing more familiarity with that area, they could really use folks who have that familiarity and can review things. SIG release. So release is both a team that happens every, 3 times a year, and also a SIG that exists all the time. And one thing that SIG does is work on release automation. So tools that the release uses 3 times a year to get the release out. So if you want to learn more about what kinds of tools they're trying to build to help with the releases, check that out. SIG security. Help Kubernetes understand and address CVEs. So in the security group, they have folks who work on doing audits of the project to understand our security posture. They own all sorts of aspects of security in Kubernetes. So I think generally helping folks understand and address the CVEs that Kubernetes has. All right. And at this point, I have gone on longer than I usually try to with this section of the presentation. So I usually try to have a time check here and see if anyone has any questions. So you've learned a lot so far. Do you have any questions right now? And if you don't, I'll go into common contribution pitfalls.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
Hello. I just had a few questions. I've watched the contributor course on YouTube, and I just wanted to clarify some things. I've heard we have like weekly contributor meetings. Are those on the calendar somewhere, or do we still do those?
The
Do
contributor
you,
calls used to be once a month, and we haven't done one of those in a very long time. Like it was the entire at its end, it was literally testing Zoom's limits on people in the room.
I
So
see. So there's no
Yeah, we
weekly
don't.
community meetings or anything like that?
There are some sub-projects in SIGs that do weekly meetings.
I see.
The COM sub-project has a meeting every week. The SIG contributor experience has meetings every other week. So it's more of a smaller group thing at this point, not a full contributor community thing.
I see. And do any of the SIGs work on test grid, or is that just something else?
I do not know. I would check
uh
SIG testing.
yeah, SIG testing would be the place to look, but there could be other SIGs like conformance that also use it as well. So start with testing. You could just stick your head in that Slack channel and ask, does anybody do anything with test grid? If they say yes, great.
All right, perfect. Um, and yeah, that's about all I have. I did want to ask, if I wanted to get started on Electo, would I just pop into a SIG contribx and say, hey, I want to work on Electo, and they'd point me the right way?
Yes.
Yes.
Josh Burkus would be the person most willing to guide you.
Awesome. Thank you.
With the most familiarity and ability
Yes.
to guide you, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
So pop in, we'll connect you. Any other questions so far? Would folks like to
I
hear
have
common contribution pitfalls? Go ahead.
I have one question. I'm rather a person who works a lot with Terraform every day,
Wonderful.
and I was searching for a SIG. I was going through all the SIG communities which are described in the GitHub repository, and it was very hard for me to find something which will use Terraform to do that work. Yes, I found a
Yeah.
lot of SIGs in which pull requests are connected with coding, with Python, for example, with Go. But I was not able to find anything with, for example, Terraform in ANSIG. Are you helping me somehow? Is there any
So I
area
can,
in which Terraform is used in Kubernetes project or not?
yes. SIG-Kate's infra comes to mind first. So they're the folks who own the cloud infrastructure that we use to like run and test the project. So they have massive cloud infrastructure on all of the different cloud providers. So I would imagine they use Terraform for that.
Agreed.
Partly. This
Mario
really
would know.
this really depends on so we have some parts where we use Terraform, we have some parts where we also use Carpenter. This always depends on the environment that we're using, because we are heavily relying also on managed services of the public cloud providers, because guess what? It's easier if someone else needs to do support than yourself.
Sandeep also mentions with the licensing changes, there might have been some changes to OpenTofu. Do you know of any of that, Mario? If anyone's using OpenTofu
I
at
mean,
this
we
point?
don't care, but from a user's perspective, we don't care.
For like internal SIG work, though.
Yeah.
A lot of open source contribution is best effort. So if you find an area where we have infrastructure that could be controlled by Terraform and you know how to do Terraform, you could do that.
I would like. And it doesn't matter if it's OpenTOF or Terraform. I am using both, let's say, technologies because they are very similar. At
Very
least now,
similar.
yes.
Yep.
The main problem that we usually have in SIG infra is that it takes quite a while until you get access to certain parts of it, because it's basically handing people the keys to the castle, right? This is where all of the infrastructure of the Kubernetes project is in. So it might take a while to to get into this. So I would recommend there's a bi-weekly meeting. Currently, it is at I have it here somewhere. It's every other Wednesday, and we meet at 8 p.m. UTC. This is likely to be changed. So there's currently a discussion to change this meeting to a different time slot.
So probably pop into Slack and say, hey, I want to get involved with Kate's infra. What's going on with the meeting?
And yeah, I mean the meeting will be updated in calendar. So the next meeting will still be at to 8 p.m. UTC, and it will be next week because we had it last week.
I will take a look. Thank you.
Are there any other SIGs the contributors on the call can think of where Terraform expertise might be useful? Infra is definitely the main one that comes to mind for me. Probably that. Cool. Any other questions? All right, then. I'll go over some common contribution pitfalls really quickly here. One that folks always relate to is the good first issue trap. So the scenario goes something like this. You're a new prospective contributor, and you're excited to make your mark on the community. You find an issue with the good first issue label on GitHub, and you think, great, I'll claim this issue, write some code, and I'll have contributed to Kubernetes. Backing up a step, once you pick up that good first issue, how are you going to complete it? I mentioned earlier that the Kubernetes community uses tools like our Prow bot to help us manage issues. Are you familiar with that bot? It's fine if you're not. Maybe you'll just start writing code. Those reviewers, approvers, and owners that we mentioned should hopefully appear to make sure that the issue has the right labels and stuff on it. Once you've written your code, you'll also need to get their attention to review your PR. And remember, there are a lot more contributors than there are reviewers, and they're much more likely to look at something that they've heard something about previously than something that just pops up in their GitHub notifications. And they're like, what is this thing in my area? What is this person trying to do? And how does it fit in with everything else that we're trying to do as a SIG? So when you make your PR, reviewers and approvers will be automatically assigned. But what if there are issues with your code? You might need to go back and forth with those reviewers on GitHub. Are you comfortable using comments and pull requests to see that work through to completion? Most good first issues that get picked up by new non-member contributors never make it to completion. The code never gets checked in. And then the community has all these stale issues and PRs sitting around for work that they really needed done, but the person who picked it up got lost and ended up abandoning their contribution halfway. Then those reviewers, approvers, and owners have to go through the process of triaging that issue and opening it again, or whatever else they might have to do with it. So it was difficult to get the reviewer to look at it in the first place because they already have too many PRs to review that were already in their plan. And then we used to actually, one thing I keep thinking I should mention more here is in the comms team, we used to publish good first issues that were open on GitHub every week. But by the time we found the good first issue and published it, it'd be gone within like 10 minutes. So there was no point in us posting them on GitHub because people find them and pick them up. They just never get done. So avoid the good first issue trap by just joining a SIG and sticking with it. When you know the people you're working with and the goals that you're working toward, you can be a valuable part of not just doing the work, but making sure that the work gets done. So beware of the good first issue trap. A lot of folks who pop on this call can relate to this and have had similar issues. When we have folks from SIG Docs on to talk about this, they say that they have a no cookie licking policy in SIG Docs. So if a good first issue or some issue within SIG Docs has been picked up, that doesn't mean that someone else can't work on it, because the chances are that the first person who picked it up isn't going to finish it anyway. So no cookie licking. And then I have a couple of other things. That is the biggest one. One is embracing empathy or entropy. Also embrace empathy. That's a good idea. But entropy, there's a lot of stuff going on in the Kubernetes community. We talked about a lot of things today. You probably won't remember all of it 10 minutes from now, much less next week. But hopefully a few things stick with you. And that's just how learning goes. So in order to be a regular contributing member of the Kubernetes community, you just have to embrace that entropy. There's big stuff going on all the time. You'll remember a small portion of it. And then the next week, if you talk about it again, then you'll remember more of it, and so on and so forth. So it's another reason that we suggest just getting involved and sticking with it, because the project is too big for any one person to understand by themselves, much less in one sitting. And finding your place in the community. Law of mobility. Reminder that the ladder is not the one true way. Sticking with one SIG is not the one true way. Most regular contributors that you meet will tell you stories of how they tried one SIG and it didn't work out for them, and so they tried something else. Maybe they tried a couple more times before they finally found an area that really clicked with them. I started out trying to be part of SIG testing, and it didn't take. And then a year or two later, someone mentioned that this group, or the comms group, was starting up, and that's where I ended up contributing regularly. So don't feel like you have to stick in one place. There's plenty of areas to contribute to, and you should check them out to find the place that works best for you. Yeah, and there's the resources slide. Any other questions, folks? We've got 3 minutes left.
I think it's worth noting, Caslin, that you started out working on contributor communications, but now you run the broader SIG. So it's entirely possible.
That is true. Yeah, I started out in the comms group, which was just starting out during the pandemic in 2020. And it was at 8 a.m. on Fridays. And so I only attended the meetings sometimes. And then people started dropping off of that work because we're all volunteers and sometimes you just move on. And I was like, I don't want this to end. And so here now I am as a co-lead of that sub-project and of the SIG. And Chris went through the same experience. Except that you actually attended the meetings more frequently than me at the beginning.
Correct. But the East Coast time is much more accommodating for that. Yes.
Time zones, the greatest challenge in open source. Any questions? Anyone excited to work on anything in particular? We could help point you in the right direction.
No questions here. I just want to say thank you.
Thanks for joining. Apologies for not putting out more social media about this earlier. We need to get that going better. I'm also the social media lead of the comms group, and I need to do more work there.
Automation.
Automation. We have some automation. We should put this into automation.
I agree.
We should do that.
Yeah, if that's on the calendar, I wonder. There's ways. Yes.
We'll talk about that this week on Friday. Go ahead.
I was wondering, like, would it help to update this PDF or slides with the latest data?
Yeah, we should. We didn't publish it from November. Yeah,
I was thinking like if I could help in that, but the thing is that like, has anybody got the slides source and not the PDF?
Yes, I have it. I can ping you into it if you want to help out with these.
I would at least try with the slides if it is possible. So I mean, at least get the data and some of the like the help needed stuff also. I might get them updated.
Join us. Join us. This
Hey.
own sub project.
Pretty much.
Yep.
Contribex already has 11 sub projects, 13, something like that. Let's add another one. All right, we are at time and I do need to pop over to another meeting. So we're going to go ahead and say goodbye to our friends on YouTube. Thank you everyone for joining New Contributor Orientation for January. ping us on Slack, ping me directly. I'm always happy to help you. Pop into SIG Contribx or any of the SIGs that caught your interest. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us exactly what you're interested in so that we have something to jump off of that we might be able to actually give you an answer to, because otherwise things get dropped. And if you don't get an answer the first time, try again. Thanks for joining. Bye, YouTube.
Thank you. Bye.